Hello everyone and welcome back to Live at 5. I am Kevin Adkisson, curator with the Cranbrook Center for Collections and Research. And today, on this gorgeous late summer day, I am over at Thornlea, the home of Henry Scripps Booth and Carolyn Farr Booth. Now, Henry and Carolyn, who went by Harry and Carol, lived here from 1927 until Carol's death in 1984 and Harry's death in 1988. Now, this house is just below Cranbrook House, down off of Cranbrook Road. Brookside School for Children is right behind me, and then the house today is used for Cranbrook for a number of purposes, for meetings, for special events, for conferences, meals, as well as our COVID quarantine, which luckily, or hopefully, we won't have to use very much more this year. But today, I wanted to come down to Thornlea to show you just one specific room, the Oratory at Thornlea. Now, I don't know about you, but at my own personal house, or in my apartment now, I do not have a oratory. Oratory is a Roman Catholic term for small private chapel. And it's unusual to have an oratory in a house in America at all, but especially unusual to have an oratory in a house belonging to Episcopalians. And so why exactly would we have a rather esoteric room in a house that belonged to Episcopalians and not Roman Catholics? Well, the house behind me, Thornlea, was designed by a very young man, enthusiastic about architecture, enthusiastic about life, enthusiastic about design, and who had just come off of a multi-year study of European architecture and design. And so when Harry Booth designed this house, he really was looking towards his European travels for inspiration. And I think that that is really where he saw private chapels dedicated to family worship for the first time, and where he got the idea to build one into his own house. Now, before we go inside and check out the oratory, I thought we'd look a little bit more at the outside of Thornlea. I should have chosen an outdoor Live at 5 location because today's weather is just stunningly beautiful. But we will look here at the sort of different architectural styles that Harry Booth used on his own house. Now, he builds the house out of concrete block and then Dutch imported brick that was imported through the Anglo-Dutch Brick Company. And so these bricks were made in the Netherlands and then brought over to New York and shipped here by rail car. The concrete block, I imagine, was built locally. And then all of it is sort of combined together in an eclectic mix of European styles, that we have these wonderful albums in Cranbrook Archives called The Pleasures of Life, which were made by Harry Booth that documented his travels, it documented his adventures with his friends and his family, especially his little sister, Florence. But in The Pleasures of Life, I can see where Harry Booth was studying like the diaper pattern of the brick, or even the way that these concrete spandrels are spanning across the different windows. Even things like this little window popping out here, you can follow exactly what Harry Booth is seeing in Europe and then what he is designing for his own house. And so I think it's very interesting that we have these photo albums, these family photo albums that show architecture in Europe, and then we have a house that he designs in 1924, 1925 that combines many of those photos. Now, we also have his sketchbooks and we have his travel sketches, which he again used in the design of his own house. Now, if you've followed Live at 5 for a long time, I have done other tours of Thornlea. And so today we won't be touring the entire house, but we will be looking especially at the oratory. We'll say hello to Melinda, one of the Booth's 5 children, and then we'll say hello to Harry, who is looking at us from his living room. But I want us to head up past this pretty amazing Pewabic pottery radiator cover and up these magnificent solid oak stairs to the oratory. Now, I'm going to come back in a few minutes and talk about these safety rails, these doors, as well as our perennially popular Thanksgiving piece, this carved figure of a shepherd with turkey up above, because all of these pieces are adding up towards the artisans that came together to make the oratory possible. And the placement of the oratory is interesting. It's in the sort of homeowner's wing. And so on the left-hand side was Mrs. Booth's room. This was Carol Booth's room, and I could have turned the lights on if I knew I was going to show it to you. On this side was Harry's room, connected to the guest bedroom. But in the middle is our focus for today, the oratory, the private family chapel. And if we look up, here is what I think is the most beautiful and interesting part of the chapel, which is the wooden ceiling. Now I'm going to turn the camera a little bit just to sort of block out the window light and get us a better sense. It is a pretty small room. I can almost, in my wingspan, touch both sides of the room. So it's about 6 feet wide, maybe 12 feet long. There are 6 chairs in the chapel. And I don't actually know how the family really used this. I don't have records that say, oh, every Sunday night we came up to pray. I do know that they did use the room, and their children and grandchildren remember it as such, but I don't think that they had regular services. And as Episcopalians, not Catholics, they wouldn't have had the sacraments here in the oratory. I just want to talk for the next few minutes here about some of the objects, because as part of the Cranbrook Center for Collections and Research, and as the curator of the center, it's actually my job to maintain all these things that you see in Thornlea as cultural properties. And over the past 3 years, we've gone through every closet, every building at Cranbrook, and inventoried every single object. And so I actually did this a few years ago, and I went through all of the things in the oratory, and this was one of the spaces that I argued as curator should actually be maintained in its entirety. Not every room at Cranbrook can be a museum, and so sometimes you have rooms that, yeah, they are historic, or they could be historic, but they're in a different use, or they're too valuable, too important of a location, and so we can't exactly have them historically correct. I argued, and luckily the committee and board of trustees agreed, we should never change the oratory. It's a small space, it's really the size of a large closet, and it's so important to the story of Harry and Carol. And so each of these items was then fully accessioned. So what does that mean? It means that all of these are viewed as artworks belonging to Cranbrook, and we cannot get rid of them without a pretty intensive deaccessioning process. Now, to tell us more about the story of these objects, I want to start with the ceiling. These panels were initially carved in Germany for use in wood paneling downstairs in the living room. Eventually, Harry and Carol never actually got around to installing the panels, and so they used them here. Actually, I'm crossing my stories. Forget I ever said that. That's the dining room credenza that's carved by the same wood carvers. This was always a ceiling. So let's go back to thinking about the ceiling. It was carved by 2 young wood carvers in Germany, in Oberammergau, Wilhelm and Max Spiegel. And the Spiegel brothers had been met by Harry Booth in 1923 when he was studying on the Grand Tour in Italy, throughout Europe. He went from Italy to Germany, through Austria, England, France, and the Grand Tour was part of the education of any young architect. The Spiegels were actually the inn that Harry Booth and his best friend J. Robert F. Swanson stayed at, was the Spiegel Pension in Oberammergau. Now, Harry and Bob were in Oberammergau in the winter of 1922, 1923, and they saw the Passion play there. The Passion is every 10 years, but it hadn't been put on because of World War I, and so they saw it in 1922. Meanwhile, they befriend the 2 young Spiegels, and I used to have a picture of the Spiegels out here. It looks like it's been put away. But the Spiegels are befriended, and they're just young men. But as soon as Harry Booth gets back here, he writes to the Spiegels, and he says, "Won't you carve something for me?" And so these 2 brothers, working in Oberammergau, begin to carve pieces for Thornlea House and shipping them back and forth. And so the Spiegel brothers stay in touch. with Harry Booth. They also are visited multiple times. This is a piece you can see here, Wilhelm Spiegel, Oberammergau 1929. So this is done a little bit later than the ceiling. On a solid piece of oak, we have our little, I don't know, these look like chickens. Down here, we have some birds up top, and then we have the turkey in the dead center, all on this pretty amazing solid panel of oak. Now, the Spiegels also carved these doors, these kind of safety doors at the top of the stairs, again with a combination of geometric and floral themes. And the Spiegel name is also on these somewhere. And on these, oh yeah, here it is. Wilhelm Spiegel down in the corner. And then there's two pieces downstairs as well. Now, the Spiegels were young men. Harry Booth and Bob Swanson were young men. They did all speak German, and so they would have spoken German together, but though they are writing in English back and forth. Eventually, Wilhelm Spiegel writes to Harry Booth saying, "Can you please send a letter about my skill and usefulness to the American Embassy in Stuttgart to try and get him out of the economic conditions of Germany in the late 1920s. Whether or not Harry Booth ever sent that letter is unknown. Both of the Spiegels end up fighting in World War II, which is where one of the Max Spiegel, the younger brother, dies in the German infantry in World War II. And then Wilhelm Spiegel dies of brain tumor in 1951. Harry Booth continues to sort of reflect back on them, and he actually had a picture of Wilhelm Spiegel at the time of his death still sitting on his desk in Thornlea studio. So the Spiegels are these old family friends from his grand tour in Europe who are carving these panels. And if we look closely at the panels, you can see over here, Blind Justice with her scales. We can see different crops. I noticed here was a little house with some, I don't know if those are fields or they kind of look more like waves. And Harry Booth would later reflect how happy he was that he had found his own wood carvers from Oberammergau, because his father, George Booth, Cranbrook's co-founder, had his wood carvers from Oberammergau in John Kirschmeyer and Alois Lang, who both did carvings at Cranbrook House and at Christ Church, Cranbrook. Now, I will say, I'm no expert in wood carving, but we can see that the Spiegels are a little bit younger, they're a little bit less refined, and I think that their carvings, here you can see, is that a lion, perhaps Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John going across the ceiling here. It's not quite the skill of someone like John Kirschmeyer, but again, these are very young men. Now, next up on our tour of the oratory here is the sanctuary lamp, another feature of Catholic architecture that we find here in our Episcopalian oratory. The sanctuary lamp is usually a glass cover that is in a different color from any other lamp. So traditionally it is red, but it can be amber, it can be purple, it can be green, it actually can be any color as long as the lamp is not the color of all the other candles. And the sanctuary lamp is kept burning at all times in a Catholic church whenever the sacrament is present. And so anytime you go to a Catholic church, it should have 7 days of oil burning the lamp per the commandment to Moses to always have a lamp burning in the temple. And so again, this is a Catholic artifact here in our Episcopalian house. I don't know much about this sanctuary lamp as far as its design. It seems very typical to what I see online. What is interesting is about the person who gave it to the Booths. It was a gift of Edward J. Nally, who was the first president of the RCA company, of the American Marconi Company. He was the general manager of American Marconi Company and then the first president of RCA between 1919 and 1923. And so I don't actually know how Edward J. Nally knew the Booths, but this was a gift from the president of RCA, and that is a note from Harry Booth, is how I know that at all. Next up are these beautiful brocades. These are actually features from Cranbrook House. They are visible in Cranbrook House by 1937, though they are much older. Italian 19th century embroidery velvet pieces that were on view in the Cranbrook House still room. There are 8 of these panels. I have 4 of them on display here in the Oratory, and 4 of them have returned back to Cranbrook House. Now, from these panels, these embroidery panels, if we look at the window itself shows the Madonna and Child sitting here, looking very medieval, but in fact this is a 20th century window piece made in the New York studio of G. Owen Bonawit. And G. Owen Bonawit was a stained glass maker who, though he retired very young, he had trained with his uncle who was a stained glass artist, and then he goes into practice sort of right before the Great Depression. He practices, or rather from 1919 and through the Great Depression, retires in 1941, but in that relatively short amount of time, G. Owen Bonawit would become one of the leading stained glass artists in this country. And he was famous for his skill at reproducing designs from images, from lithographs, from engravings, and then it's sort of this industrial scale production of handmade art glass, always the contradiction of the arts and crafts, and he could crank out windows for buildings like the Cook Law Quadrangle at the University of Michigan, or all of Yale and Princeton's Gothic Revival buildings, Northwestern, University of Chicago, all have massive Gothic buildings with massive amounts, like thousands of G. Owen Bonawit windows. And so this is from the studio of Bonawit. It is a 20th century window. It is probably reproduced from a earlier text or book, lithographic print, who knows, but it is, I believe, custom for the Oratory, New York-made stained glass. Now below that is this wonderful creche, or nativity. This is made by Clivia Calder Morrison. And Clivia was born in Michigan. She's from mid-Michigan. She studied at the Detroit Society of Arts and Crafts before marrying James Calder. And James Calder and his brother Ralph Calder were Connecticut-based artists. James Calder, the Calders end up here in Michigan. They become friends with the Booths through the University of Michigan, and it was actually Ralph Calder who was the architect of Thornlea's studio in the backyard here at the house. So Calder is good friends with the Booths. This is Clivia Calder Morrison, and she, again, studies at the Society of Arts and Crafts. I'm so tripping over myself today. Before going on to a long career, she lives to the age of 100, still doing sculptures in her 90s in Florida. And she is related as, I guess, a great aunt to Calder, the Mobile artist. And so all of these Calders, there are many different Calder artists, of which Alexander Calder is the most famous. And so this is a cool little tie into other 20th century artists. We have the 3 wise men here, really beautiful sort of Art Deco nativity. And Clivia is probably most famous for her work during the sort of W.P. Ayr era at Michigan State University. So she has a number of sculptures at Michigan State. We can look here closer at the Virgin Mary and the baby Jesus. Really beautiful set, or creche here. Now below that is a wooden cross, very simple wooden cross. It was kept on display because the silver cross here was extraordinarily valuable. So we do have the silver cross. It's over at the Art Museum in storage in a box to keep it from tarnishing. But the wooden cross here was used both by Harry Booth and by us as a sort of day-to-day cross when the silver cross was put away. Now beneath this is a prayer stand, prayer bench. And this was purchased during the same grand tour in which Harry Booth met the Spiegel brothers. And so this was purchased from an antique dealer in Italy, in Naples, I believe. One of the largest antique dealers working in Italy in the interwar period. And so this is a antique Italian prayer bench that Harry Booth purchased on his 1922-1923 grand tour, and then brought back and used here in the house. Now, from the prayer bench, which is an actual antique, there are the seats. And the seats are from the American Seating Company in Grand Rapids. These were a gift from the Cranbrook School, Cranbrook Foundation Band Children for Christmas 1937. Now, how did they know exactly what to get Harry Booth, their chairman? Well, Carol organized the purchase of these for the chapel. And so Carol worked to help the Cranbrook Foundation Band Children know exactly what to get their chairman. And so these 6 chairs arrived on Christmas Day, 1937. Now, it is, again, a pretty cool small room. If you've ever joined me for a tour of Thornlea, you know that the house is a pretty neat maze of bedrooms up here, 7 in total. The oratory divides Harry's bedroom from the guest room, and then Carol's, which leads to the nursery and the children's room. The last part of the oratory that I'll point out is just how it was opened up to the house. And so if you look here, originally there were curtains that were dividing the space, and then there was actually a door here. So in the door jamb, we can find the scars of an actual door. And I imagine if I went through enough Cranbrook basements, I might even find the door. But in photos of the house, the door was actually taken off. And I think that's already showing just how very small this room was that the Booths didn't need the door. They are protecting it. And if any Booth descendants are watching and you can correct me on any of this, I always appreciate your comments or your emails. And then there is a scripture running around the room. Above all other gods, we worship thee. There is one God. That seems like a rather later addition. Harry Booth was very dedicated to this idea of sort of the oneness of all religion, very Episcopalian idea, this idea of God of many names. Now, if you are interested in hearing me talk a little bit more about churches, about religious architecture, on Sunday, September 17th, I will be delivering a lecture down at Holy Redeemer Church in Detroit. And so if you are in the area, Holy Redeemer is one of the largest Catholic parishes in Detroit. It's in southwest Detroit. Today it is a largely Latino congregation, but historically it was the largest Irish American congregation, Catholic congregation in the country for some bit of time. Holy Redeemer was built in the 1920s. It is a high point of Renaissance revival architecture, and I will be delivering a bilingual lecture there. I will not be delivering it bilingually. I will be delivering it in English if I learn to speak by then, and it will be translated. Now, it is free. We have over 500 people signed up, and so if you want to come, head over to center.cranbrook.edu, and you can find a lot more information about that lecture. Again, on September 17th, 2023 at Holy Redeemer, I will be talking about a history of 20th century religious architecture in Detroit, and then be leading a brief tour of Holy Redeemer Church, which is a pretty magnificent building. Thanks for sticking with me for this Live at 5. I feel a little bit flat-footed, I don't know why, today, but it is between the grave technological issues I face trying to do these videos, as well as cracked cameras and other things. Hopefully next week will be a little bit smoother sailing. If you have any questions, if you have any comments, I always appreciate to hear from you. And if you have any place that I need to go on Live at 5, please send in your suggestions. Today I was trying to find a subject matter that could tie it to my lecture on Sunday. In Christchurch, Cranbrook, unfortunately, doesn't like me and my camera poking around, and so this is the most religious space that I could find on Cranbrook's campus, and I do love the Oratory and its history, its charming art objects, its furniture, the beautiful ceiling by the Spiegel brothers, the Clivia Calder Morrison creche. It's a pretty wonderful room, so I hope you enjoyed poking around there today with me at Live at 5, and then I hope to see you Sunday at Holy Redeemer Church. Again, if you want to see and learn much more about this house, if you go back on our YouTube channel, we do have quite a few Live at 5s that take place here at Thornlea, including a full tour that goes basement to 3rd floor. Until next Wednesday, I'm Kevin Atkinson, curator with the Cranbrook Center for Collections and Research. I look forward to seeing you next time.